Is mental health expert Andrea Wise-Brown. We appreciate you joining us for your insight this morning. So on a day like this, it's difficult, right, for so many, especially those who were at the Capitol. Talk about how traumatic something like this can be.
Absolutely. So, Michelle, we know this rocked our nation to the core. It was unbelievable what was happening because, in our perception in the United States, this was the most sacred space that you could be, the safest place that you could be in the United States. And that was a lie. So, we had a false sense of safety, and it was shown on this day. So, now, today, 1 year later, a lot of those feelings of depression, those feelings of hopelessness, those feelings of helplessness are triggered and they come up again. We will relive this over and over again. And especially for the senators who were there at the time working and the congressmen, the police officers. I mean, this was horrible. And this is something that they will have to relive over and over again. Michelle, you talked about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of the people who were there were experiencing that, and they are experiencing that now today. They are experiencing high anxiety, depression, having nightmares, and it's horrible. And it's something that will go on for some time, and they do need help. But there was something else that I did want to point out, Michelle, is that there was also secondhand trauma that we experience as onlookers, people in our states who were actually in the states who were looking in and watching it. We didn't have any control. We couldn't help. Our empathy was high and we felt helpless and hopeless. So there was secondhand trauma that also occurred that has rocked the nation, where we have sleepless nights, even when we think about it, because we were connected to what the outcome was. And it was like watching a movie, but it was real.
Right, that secondhand trauma. I remember, where I was and how I was feeling for certain on this day a year ago. The Capitol Insurrection Committee, as we know, held their first hearing last July. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what one of the officers had to say.
But on January 6th, for the first time, I was more afraid to work at the Capitol than my entire deployment to Iraq. In Iraq, we expected armed violence because we were in a war zone, but nothing in my experience in the Army or as a law enforcement officer prepared me for what we confronted on January 6th.
On that day, I participated in the defense of the United States Capitol from an armed mob of thousands determined to get inside. I was grabbed, beaten, tased, all while being called a traitor to my country.
Wow, certainly some powerful testimony there. Now, when it comes to these officers being able to share their stories, how important is it? How does it help with their healing process?
So it does help to share your story, but I want them to share their stories with mental health professionals, with psychiatrists and psychologists and psychotherapists. That's where they need to share their stories so that they can help them to process those feelings. And this is another thing. This is something that we do in therapy, is we help people to actually listen to their stories and to make sense of them, to say, okay, which story is rational and which story is irrational. And this right here is an indication and an obvious showing of a story that we would imagine that would be irrational, that is rational. So there is rational paranoia that has come from this incident. And not only with those officers, but even the secondhand trauma that I was talking about with people of color. As people of color actually watched this happen, it just really slapped in our faces how we are devalued in this country, because it was a blatant display of privilege. I mean, people of color, we can't even jog in our neighborhoods, wear a hoodie, eating Skittles. We can't even question authority, play in a park without losing our lives. And yet and still, during this insurrection, with all of this violence and these threats, people lost their lives and they are still living today. So that is also another piece that I want to point out today, is secondhand trauma that we've experienced as people of color that has brought sleepless nights, anger, anxiety, nightmares, and changes in mood.
And so how can we cope with that? What best tips can you offer?
Yes, so what we need to do is go to therapy. You have to speak with a mental health professional to help you process these feelings, because in certain situations, you can't control them, but then we can help you to identify what you can control. There's cognitive behavioral therapy that you can actually have. There's EMDR therapy. And for some people, they'll have to take psychotropic drugs for some time. Now, this doesn't mean that everyone will suffer for the rest of their lives, because there is help, but you have to reach out for the help, and we are here to help you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and insight on this morning. Certainly a day that we'll be talking about for years to come. We appreciate your time so much.